Trails in the Sky 3rd is the final game in the trilogy of the Trails in the Sky games, of 12 games in the Trails series, not counting two different non-localized games, which are Reverie and Kuro no Kiseki. Trails in the Sky 3rd is usually lauded as the worst in the series arc, following the first game and then its second game, Trails in the Sky SC or second chapter. In this video, I will be covering combat, story, and general gameplay, which do intertwine with each other. I will be reviewing these systems and their improvements. If you haven't played the Trails games, I'll try to keep you up as well. Combat in Trails is a grid turn-based system which relies on your base attack, arts, and crafts. Crafts are special abilities achieved by hitting the opponent. In these crafts is also a chain ability which uses as many members as you can to base attack one enemy plus some extra damage. They can also impede an enemy channeling an attack, though already channeled attacks will still be active. S-crafts are special move charge fully, which can be used at any time you want, meaning you can plan when a bonus comes up, which are buffs depending on when you make a turn. They also got upgraded animations, so that's nice. Arts are like spells, which you can use based on your materia, orbments. Although some orbments are too powerful to equip and need more powerful slots, coming up to 3 in this game. Thankfully, the game has a guide that shows you the orbment combinations that give you a specific art. You can get the orbments by finding them in chests, or crafting them, which is called synthesizing here. Now that we have that out of the way, combat is a general improvement, in its variety that is. Third Sky added more bonuses like Vanish, Guard, Item Up, Rush, and Literal Death. The most unique of these is Vanish, which makes you disappear, although the game treats it as if you were dead. Meaning, if all your party members were down and you disappear, you lose. Trails also introduces many other characters to choose from, and a support character that gives you passive buffs. As for enemy design, Trails adds the most amount of enemies, including designs. Some monsters can now reflect damage, and some use arts that can't be interrupted more often. Other enemies can be hard hitters but have low agility, and other enemies can utilize status effects and immunities more, like one of the most annoying enemies which will petrify you if they touch you. Thankfully, as well, the game adds a description on what you should expect, enemy weakness-wise, through arts, though it seems like some melee damage gets negated while other times it passes, which makes me believe it's weapon-wise, weapon type-wise, or an attack minimum needed. This, in my opinion, is a bit conflicting, since the amount of information the game gives you to think strategically falls when you have to guess if your attack will do any damage at all. This also applies to some effects on enemies who aren't bosses, like death being resisted on a normal enemy I encountered. This brings some other problems about the combat, like since status effects against bosses and even their summons will almost always negate effects, including debuffs sometimes. Not only would I like to tell when this is being resisted, but if the game decides to do this approach, my solution would be to include more meaningful combat encounters in areas which also serve as skill checks. These encounters could be avoidable, unlike another case in bad game design, where the game forces you to start over a boss battle or return to the main menu. Trails tries to combat this by making each subsequent battle easier, but this forces people who don't want to do that to cross their fingers hoping they saved recently. Another comment I have to make is that some battles can be flipped on their heads because of how overpowered the status effects are. Watch this clip and see how long I am stunned for, and watch what happens when they miss or I make a small adjustment. Judging that this could be called a more gimmicky battle, since clearly it is trying to make you work around it and is optional, I still think it should be taken into consideration. However, this happens many times even in boss fights. Though Trails improves the mechanics, in other words, doesn't always make every boss channel and attack right after, some bosses still make you have to overuse the Earthguard move, which grants a free immunity to anything for one round. I understand the need for it, but to this extent is ridiculous. Look. To jump off that, I do wish animations were quicker. In the Chariot Kevin boss fight pretty early on, the chariots take forever to make the same cannon shot move. Fortunately, the game setup provides a turbo mode with tab, but I don't think this should be expected to be used in all battles, especially cinematically heavy ones that are crucial to the story, since a lot of the landmark bosses sometimes have a big HP sponge. Next is the story and the gameplay, which will intertwine with each other. The story starts off with Kevin trying to rightfully rob an artifact which belonged to the church. His subordinate Rise also helps him keep an artifact which was deemed to be active when they passed the artifact back to them, which means it should be given back, but it then activates and sends them to another world. Most of Third Sky takes place in a world called Phantasma, in which you traverse to pick up ceiling cubes that contain characters you can play. You can also reach monuments or pillars which can act as shops and restore your HP. With an artifact you gained earlier, you can also teleport to each plane which acts as levels, most of which can also end up in fighting an illusion of one of the characters you know. What I just read to you is a massive blunder in Trails gameplay if you're experienced with the last two games. Though featuring the actual different parts of the maps, it is clearly not the majority of the time, which leads to very unoriginal and boring setting with a lot of basic level design, with the binary paths you can take eventually after a couple of steps leading into chests, constantly having to run up and down. This is also evident in the pillars. Instead of realistic world building, buying from shops, or built cities and hotels, we get pillars. Fucking pillars. There are no NPCs either, which had a substantial role in filling out the world, since all of them had dialogue and were voice acted. This, along with the drip-fed story, which is the most vague I've experienced in a video game. In Chapter 6, you still won't know what the hell or why the hell you are there, with the only lead being a man in the mask, which by the way gets pointed out by the protagonist for being too edgy and vague. However, Third's characters are the most confusing thing to tackle. You see, another major part of Sky's gameplay, the third, are its doors, which function as memory fragments and character stories, and they give rewards to make it worth your while. These stories, however, are entirely random. They seem like something that could have been shown in the last games where characters were made to interact with you and the world more. Instead, they are used as glorified chest boxes now. There are no connections with anything whatsoever. With this information, you might think character writing is still sound in the base game, but in reality, the game besides the doors doesn't stand on its own with its characters either. Almost all of the character writing of each of the characters besides Kevin are done when they are introduced into the Phantasma and are shocked by the experience. This misses the introduction of the world and relationships with Estelle from the first chapter and tension of Joshua's missing and the society from the second chapter. We are left with a clear building story for Kevin left, but even that gets sacrificed in tandem with a change of pace in combat, as Kevin eventually gets ill after activating one of his sealed powers, which I actually think is well done, since it's the first time we get to see a story behind earned abilities. However, this timing, along with the lack of story, really leaves no motivation to push forward. In other words, it leaves me with no motivation to move forward. So, next review will be Trails from Zero or maybe Shadowbringers.